I just wanted to make a couple of introductory remarks that may or may not turn into subjects that Michael and I can explore in conversation a bit. But the first remark I wanted to make, and it's maybe evidenced a bit by this absolutely beautiful exhibition of Michael's around us this evening, is that Sir Michael, almost more than any other British artist, and perhaps even internationally, that I can think of, is an artist whose work manages with incredible elegance, but also absolutely wonderful inscrutability, to avoid classification. Whenever I think of Michael's art, I can't actually fit it into any particular school or movement or group or even generation of artists. I think about it and I think it has elements of pop. Then I think actually it has elements of minimalism. And then I think, no, really, it's conceptual. And I think one of the things that I've always found so compelling about Michael's art is this ability to avoid easy classification while remaining pictorially, aesthetically, conceptually mesmeric. I think you could take almost any of the images in this gallery and you will find something about them that will hold your attention, however simple it is. And this brings me to my second point, which is that I think, although I'm probably about to show myself up here, I think it was Virginia Woolf who described Marcel Proust's great novel of reclaimed memory, in remembrance of things past, as an encyclopedia of the human consciousness. And when I think of Michael's work, and while I'm not trying to make ridiculously elevated comparisons here, I wonder whether behind my thoughts about is he a minimalist, is he a pop artist, is he a conceptualist, is actually something more philosophical. Is he really talking or making art about the nature of objects and about our ability to recognize them? And why is it that when we look at an image, we ascribe an object and a meaning to it? And if so, how come such simple and at times seemingly eccentrically colored images can bring to mind so precisely the chairness of the chair, as Virginia Woolf also once said? So I wanted to open our conversation this evening with an absolutely terrible question that you will hate me for, because it is so general, but it's a start, which is, what motivates you to make art?
What a simple question to ask.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I hardly know what to say, really. I'm a very, I'm lost for words. I'm a very kind of rational person, which is clear when you look at what I do. And at the same time, everything I try to do, I try to trust my instinct as much as possible. And in a way, I try to both use and resist my own rationality, my own... I try to use my clarity of thought and at the same time to resist it. So I think the most dangerous thing for me in what I do is being clever. Mm-hmm. And I'm able to be clever. And sometimes I am clever. Mm. But I also think it's a danger. I think every form of art has built into it an area in which the artist is in danger within mm-hmm. their work. Mm. And for me, that's kind of mine. So my interest in the simplicity of things is to try to push things to a point where none of that is in play.
If art is, for some artists, a decision-making process, how would you relate to that idea of...
See, again, I find it very difficult because I feel the thing that ever since I was very young, I mean, really as a child, I was very interested in the contemporary world. I just was fascinated by everything that was new, everything that was modern. And I was most interested in what things looked like. I was interested in what anything looked like. When I was, 12, 13, I loved cars, and I was so interested. I mean, I was a kid in America during the years of all the cars, the great American 50s cars with the fins and everything. To this day, if there was one outside, I could tell you that's a 1957 Plymouth. You know, I mean, I would know. I know them that well, and it was this engagement. Then, when I got a little bit older, and not, as a teenager, I discovered art, and I suddenly thought that's the perfect vehicle for this interest, because I wasn't really interested in designing cars. And I'm interested in architecture, as everybody can see, but I never wanted to be an architect. The only thing that seemed to me to be interesting was art, and it was partly to do, I had a sense of its resistance to containment. And that really fascinated me, the idea that it would always resist, just like trying to classify me. I do see myself as a kind of maverick person, as an artist, and I think that many of the people who have been my students are themselves maverick and quite difficult to place.
Yeah, which I think always, it's something that you've said, coming to this exhibition specifically, was a very interesting comment that you've made in some of your writings, where you say about the relation of the viewer to the image, what it is that the viewer brings to the work of art. I wonder, would you mind talking about that a little bit, maybe in relation to some of the pictures here?
Well, one of the reasons why I got interested in a very strong color is because, you see, everything starts from an interest in the object itself and in the physicality of vision. And so as soon as you make an image of something, you've lost so much of the physicality because it's just flat. So you have to compensate. I'm trying to compensate for what's missing. And I use the color to compensate for the fact that it's not wet, it's not clear, it's not hard, it's not soft, it's not liquid, it's not all those, it doesn't have all those characteristics that the actual object would have. So the color is meant to bring it into the present moment as much as I can.
And when it comes to the actual selection of the subjects in this exhibition, Quotidian, I think Quotidian just means of the everyday, doesn't it, daily? Do you choose subjects almost kind of, not flippantly, but easily, or do you spend a long time?
I'm constantly looking for things to draw, And I have moments when suddenly I hit on something and that spins off 15 things. And I can go for a year and not draw anything new because I can't find anything to draw. And my intention is to constantly be searching for things that catch my eye and my imagination that I can see transformed into the most recent drawing I did was a plate of spaghetti. And it was the most difficult drawing I've ever made. Drawing spaghetti with a line, both sides of each strand. It's quite something.
Obviously, in this exhibition, there's a lot of reference to iconic 20th century design. Again, did you sort of set out to kind of create, if you want, your own interpretations of these designs, or were you, in another sense, were you kind of almost draining their iconography out of them?
Well, I never, what I've done in the career that I've had with these images, which started in the late 70s, I never had a plan. I wasn't after something. I was exploring something. And it never occurred to me that I'd end up all these years later, basically the same thing. So the wall that I was in 1978, it's just variations of them. But what happened over the years is that I realized that I had created through the drawing a kind of language, and that I could apply that wider than the thing that interests me is the objects, but they really represent the world we make for ourselves. This is our world. And I see them really as a form of nature. We always describe there's the human world and then there's the natural world. But of course we're nature too, and all we are doing is using our naturalness to manifest itself through the things that we make. And that's one of the reasons why I think they tell us so much, because this is how we talk to ourselves about what we are interested in, what we need. We always make things out of need. And so now now I'm so old, I feel like I can, if I want to address architecture, I should be able to do that. And if I want, I've done some computer portraits, if I want to do portraits. I mean, nothing is further from what I'm really thinking about in the basis of things. But the language suddenly seems to me to be extendable in a way that I had never anticipated.
Yeah. I mean, I remember many years ago first coming to your work, as I'm sure many people did, and I know this is rather ancient history of you, but through this absolutely iconic work that you made called An Oak Tree. And I'm sure everybody here knows what this work was. I mean, would you mind describing it? Because I get it wrong.
It's from 1973, and it's a glass of water with a text, and the text is in the form of an interview with myself, and in the text I claim to have changed it into an oak tree, regardless of what it looks like, that it is in fact an oak tree, despite appearances.
A glass of water.
And the glass of water is on a shelf high on the wall, and the text is just there.
Yeah. Now, I have been long fascinated by this work, not least, I could go on about that. However, again, not wanting to be awkward, but how did you do that? What went off in your head? Because it seems to me that these, in their own way, are the absolute direct progeny of that work.
I love that you say that, because that's how I see them.
Good.
Not everybody thinks that, but because a lot of people see them as the antithesis of that.
How very strange.
But I mean, in my kind of life's work, I started making boxes, I made boxes with hinges because I was interested in functionality. That, from the very beginning, it was the idea that, so the boxes had hinges, they had handles, you were meant to do the wrong thing, you were meant to touch it, to manipulate it. And then from those I made, then I moved into things that I had made, and then I moved into ready-mades. And in all of that, I was trying, in those days, and it was an interest of a lot of artists at the time, about what is the essence of art, what is the bottom, what is the bottom line. It's a time when Carl Andre is doing his floor pieces. There's a kind of reductiveness and a kind of trying to find out what is the essence of things. And I'm moving as close as I can to try to do that. And I'm trying to think of, I'm getting an awful lot of flack, critical flack. So I think, how can I make something that nobody can criticize?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if I did something where they couldn't prove I hadn't done it, and the only way to do that was to make something that I couldn't prove I'd done. And I grew up as a Catholic, so I knew about transubstantiation. And I suddenly thought that relationship between how something could be something that it doesn't look like, that there's a possibility in the human imagination to detach something from what you're looking at and to imagine it to be something else, to understand it as, in essence, something else.
And what is interesting about this, I don't know if anybody else has tried this, but it's certainly worth trying, is that you can, as a viewer, you can engage with that work almost in the spirit of practical magic. That if you look at it, aware that it is called an oak tree, which is incongruous, I swear to God, you can more or less hallucinate an oak tree. Something happens whereby, because of the equation that the artwork articulates, you create a synonym in your visual imagination between the glass of water on a shelf and an oak tree. And you could possibly even describe what that oak tree looks like. Now, would it be fair to say that in the work that you made after that, again, I don't want to throw around highfalutin terms, but to some extent what you were doing was creating a kind of Platonic directory of forms, that you were showing a quotidian object, but in a way that makes the viewer have to think about the objectness of that object rather than, hey, here's a drawing or here's a print. I mean, is that?
That is very close to it. And the equivalence, it's some degree of equivalence anyway between an object and an image of an object. There's all these objects here. There's the shoe. Well, there is no shoe, and yet everybody sees a shoe. And so it doesn't look anything like a shoe, not even slightly. It just has no relationship to a shoe whatsoever, except it looks like a shoe. And there's another object here. It's not in one's imagination. There is actually an object which is not a shoe being seen to be a shoe. Well, that's a really very extraordinary human ability, human phenomenon. And I often say, the reason why dogs don't watch television is because they can't see pictures. They can't read pictures. We have this extraordinary capacity to read pictures. And the more and more, it's very I've gotten kind of interested in all this, that scientists are more and more coming to the conclusion that vision, our normal vision, is much more like how we see pictures, in the sense that it's a combination of optical and conceptual. And that we don't actually, the idea, when we grew up, our idea was that your eye was a kind of mirror of the world. But then the odd thing was it turned everything upside down, but you were able to see it right way up. That was the miracle. You turned it back up. The actual thing that they're finding is that the whole of our vision is a kind of conceptual construct. We only see a little bit of we only see what we're focusing on, and our imagination fills in all peripheral vision.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the capacity to take in all of that constant moving your head, and you're constantly tight. So, our intellects are so amazing in this relationship to the visual, of being able to fill this in. So there's something to me about the way in which we are engaged in the creation of what we see, and that's what we do in pictures.
Yeah. I mean, did you find maybe when you were younger, or possibly even now, that this absolutely fascinating line of thinking, which merges philosophy with psychology, with art, did it affect the way you appreciated art history? If you went into a great museum and looked at a whatever, did you find that you were looking at pictures or in ways that surprised you, that you were taking away? Maybe another easier way of asking that question was, were the particular artists whose work you immediately related to, or images that you immediately related to?
There certainly there have always been people and works that I've felt very strongly about and very drawn to. But one of the things that struck me very early on, and which had a very big impact on my attitude in teaching, was the idea about that everybody's vision was different, and that everybody that the manifestation, that art is essentially about personal vision. And so, my art completely accommodates who I am. That's how I can do it. And the reason why I can do it is because I've come to terms with who I am. And this is me. And another person can be absolutely, totally different about everything in their personality and their life. And so long as they do the thing that is true to them, art accommodates both of us. And we're all doing that all the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think in art, it's the thing that separates artists from everybody else is being able to find a way of manifesting that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the action is not unique, but the manifestation is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask you a little bit about process. I've spoken to quite a few of your former students. One thing that they all say is that you managed to communicate to them so well the idea of visual language, whatever form that may take for individual artists, the idea of how do you create a language as an artist which is going to hold the viewer's attention, is going to tell your truth to a number of people. With your own art, it seems to me that you've managed to kind of hone and perfect a visual language which is close to minimalism, but at the same time is richly aesthetic, and at the same time does have a kind of, that thing David Sylvester once said about Richard Hamilton, about the notion of modernity, about engaging immediately with the modern. Could you tell us a little bit about your approach over the years to how you make a work, the process by which you make it, in craft terms or in concept?
Well, when I suppose if you go back to the early drawings, in the earliest drawings I didn't really know what I was doing at all. I just decided I decided after the oak tree to go back to the most basic thing I could think of, and that was drawing. It seemed to me that drawing was probably the most basic thing, because I saw the oak tree as legitimizing everything.
Yeah, it's a hard act to follow.
Yeah, and I knew I couldn't, and it was also very important, I realized very quickly I couldn't follow it. There was never going to be another oak tree. I could never pull that off again. Everything would always be secondary in that absoluteness. The oak tree is so absolute. To be able to come up with anything in a lifetime that has that kind of degree of absolute is good luck, and it doesn't come twice. So I thought, well, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life wandering around the world being the person who made the oak tree. I want to do something else.
Sure.
And so I thought, well, I've legitimized everybody else. I should legitimize myself, and I start from basics, and I started from drawing, which is where I started as a student. I started with drawing. And I drew one object at a time, and for reasons that partly had to do with that period of time, partly to do with me, I decided I wanted the images to look like, to have the character of the objects I was drawing, and they were all mass-produced. So they had no personal inflection in them. So I wanted my drawings to have no personal inflection, which is why I started to draw in tape, because the tape took away any sign of my own hand. I actually started with pencil drawings and then traced them in tape. And I've never shown anybody the pencil drawings. They're in a drawer somewhere.
It's very interesting you say this, because there was a tour to the Victoria and Albert Museum. It might have been yesterday, I think, and to their drawings collection. And one of the works they took out was one of your drawings, and it was very greatly admired. And I think, but I could be getting this wrong, but I think the drawing, or one of the people from the V&A said the drawing was made with the lines that you used to be able to get from Letraset. Is this true?
Well, it is the same tape.
Right.
There were various brands. I can't remember which brand I used at the time, but it did come in rolls like tape. And in those early works, I discovered the tape in the late 60s, and I drew the box pieces, which was the work that I was doing at that time, and the drawings at the V&A relate to are from that period. And so I had done those drawings in the late 60s, and then I didn't do any drawing very much during the whole of the 70s until late in the 70s. And then when I went to draw these objects, I remembered the tape, and I went back to the tape. But whereas in the boxes, of course, I needed straight lines, in the objects, I needed curved lines. And I discovered that there's this tape that's made out of crepe paper, and that is flexible. And this is a kind of miracle for me because, frankly, my entire body of work could not exist without the tape. Absolutely. If they stop making it, that's it. I'm finished. I sometimes think I'm going to have to buy the company, because you can't do what I do with any ordinary tape. It just kinks. It looks terrible. It looks absolutely dreadful. You can't make a curve like I make curves. These are all done. Everything here can be done easily. And all the drawings, the drawings here downstairs are all actually drawn in tape. And that's what I've been doing for God knows how many years, 40 years, 30, 40 years. And I'm very good at it. And but it is in the thing is in the tape, this ability, this thing. But then you see, I love the idea that it was a modern material. When there were slide projectors, I loved using slide projectors. They were so modern. I liked, I like computer. I like the sense of both modernity and ordinariness. That's why I got interested in painting rooms. Like paintings, and the idea of using house paint in a room to use an ordinary thing in an ordinary way, I just used different colors, but they were all commercially available. Just not everybody puts them all together at the same place.
I mean, it's interesting with the works downstairs because the palette of those, if I can use that word, is this kind of, to me, this sort of very aesthetic, kind of almost like Laduret or something, those sort of gorgeous kind of pastel pinks colors and so forth. You've achieved that, have you, by putting it's a layer over a colour?
Yes, I mean, actually, all the colours on the drawings downstairs are exactly the same colours as they are up here. And what we did was have sheets of paper, screen printed, just one colour, and I used the whole palette, my normal palette, and one color to each sheet, and the drawings are on a translucent, something called translucent drafting film. It's a kind of plastic, beautiful thing for drawing on, and it's behind it, and because of the translucence but not transparence of this material, it softens the color, and the color becomes pastel. But the color behind it is actually a vivid color like these.
I mean, it's interesting because the more you talk about it, the more it sort of shines some light on the way that these works are, on the one hand, they have this, well, it's an interesting collision of things. It's a sort of impersonality or coldness, something which I associate with the industrial, with objects that are maybe sourced from catalogues. And it also has a terrific romanticism in it, to me. I'm wondering, is this me who is bringing the romanticism to it, or do you see that there's a kind of, that there is here a confluence of things, a sort a minimalism, a coldness, an impersonality, an industrialism, but somewhere, as the glass of water turns into the oak tree, so these simple images of everyday things acquire a romance.
I mean, I think of them myself like that, and it's my way of expressing that. I mean, I think, you see, that I think that the drawings in themselves, when I was first doing the black and white wall drawings, I think they were interesting, but they weren't beguiling.
Yet these are.
But these are. It's when I discovered the color that I was able to transform them. Because, you know, I'm sure you know more philosophy than I do, but I'm sure that when I was growing up, I went to Catholic schools and we had very classical education, and there was a thing about this is before virtual reality, there was a thing called the virtual object, which was someplace in Greek philosophy where there was an idea of the object that sat between the general and the particular, and there was a virtual which sat somewhere in the middle. And I think there's some place like that.
Yeah.
So this is why I never draw things with any sign of age. There's never a shadow. They don't have a particular space. They don't have a particular world. I don't do still lifes. I can put objects together, but they're not still lifes. I'm not trying to do a genre work with it. They exist in some other realm, and it's that, for me, that realm is the realm of the immediate moment. I want it to really give you such a hit that you are aware of the moment that you're in. They don't refer to another moment somewhere else. You know, like for instance, most landscape painting refers to a landscape that you can't see. It's in the picture, but you weren't there, so you didn't see it. You didn't see that sunset, but the artist did, and now the artist will give it to you. I'm not doing that. This never existed anywhere except right here, and that's what I want.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, coming back to the specific works here, we've touched earlier on the fact that, you know, some of them reference very iconic 20th century design, but awful lot of them do. To what extent do you want your art to pay homage to, shall we say, great design? Do you want in any way for these pictures, these images, to, I mean, like over here, you know, we're looking at a pair of these are Ray-Ban aviator frames, yeah? And they communicate instantly it's such a beautiful design, but that you're not sort of what I'm trying to say. I read not so long ago a really interesting essay about Richard Hamilton making toasters, and he was very clear about the fact that, you know, he venerated the designer in Germany of a particular toaster, and etc. etc. Are you similarly interested? Nope.
No. I do that, but what I like, I mean, I don't want. That's an aspect of some objects, and I don't want to. I'm not interested in them exclusively, but I certainly don't want to exclude them because they have this high design aspect. It's, to me, it's to be able to do, you know, there's, you know, the paper cup. I really love the coffee cup because it's, you know, it is absolutely the cheapest object imaginable. They give it to you with the coffee in it. You pay for the coffee, and they give you the cup, and so it's as close to valueless as it gets, as in a very potent object, and that seems to me just as interesting as a laptop or a watch or whatever it is. It's just because, I mean, there's two things. One is I've tried to get rid of a sense of hierarchy, that there are some objects that are more important than others, and I've tried to treat everything exactly the same, so those things, those differences in value and in function and whatever, all dissolve in the work. It doesn't reflect those differences. The other thing that I think is quite important to say is that I'm a very late bloomer. I'm a very late developer, really, and because the work that I'm known for, this kind of work, I didn't start it until the mid-90s. I was 55 years old when I started doing work that looks more or less like this. It took me a long time to find. I'm working at this thing all my life, and it takes me that long to kind of get to the point. And I'm happy to tell you that I now feel quite comfortable with this.
Yeah.
But it took a long for me to recognize certain things about it and to see certain possibilities in it.
There's one, again, I don't mean to be too open-ended, and we can always ask another question if this doesn't suit you. But there's an interesting definition, you're going to love this, there's an interesting definition of art. And it comes from Samuel Beckett writing about Proust. And he basically says that art, summarized, he says that art is the translation of an inner text into a form that anyone can read. In other words, that the artist takes a personal truth and with art creates an act of translation that makes it a universal truth. And I was thinking about this when I came to see your exhibition, and it seemed to me that I don't know when I last saw an exhibition that is such a perfect example of Beckett's definition of art, the translation of a personal truth into a universal truth. And I think that why I say that, and I don't mean it in a gushing way, is the precision with which you do it. Again, it's this refinement, it's this bringing it down to near minimalism. And yet, there's a world to me in each of these. If I see that shoe, the woman's shoe there, or a hand grenade, or a pair of aviator glasses, each one opens a world. And so, is that, maybe it's an impossible question for you to answer, but does it ring true for you, that?
No, I think it's a lovely thought, and I would feel very touched because the funny thing, because I have have an Irish background. I was born in Ireland. When I was trying to find myself in my youth, the person I loved most, who was Irish, was Beckett, and I wanted to be Beckett. In the way that young people sometimes have this idea that they have a hero and they want to be that person. And it did gradually dawn on me that I wasn't Beckett. And that the things that made, the life that made Beckett was so unlike my life. I'm a kid in a suburb in Washington, D.C. in the 50s, looking at cars with fins. This is not Beckett's life. And so it was the realization that you are who you are. You have the life you have. You mind the experience. You are the consequence of many things, but a lot of it is your own experience, your own life experience. And then that desire to externalize it. Seems to me that's what an artist tries to do. It is a kind of I see my own sense of things in virtually everything I do, and some of it comes out here, but it comes out for me everywhere in what I do.
Maybe a useful way to conclude our part of this conversation is to go back to the beginning when I mentioned the notion of when Virginia Woolf said of Proust about an encyclopedia of human consciousness. Do you feel at this stage in your work that, and I don't mean this in a flippant way, but that having, after much work and much thought, found your method, your subject, your vision, that now it's the potential works that lie ahead are almost infinite, that it's inestimable, that you could basically just carry on.
Carry on forever. Yes, I do have that sense, and I have a sense that I mean, there have been various phases. You know, as I say, I started doing the drawings in 1978, and over the years, particularly the first 20 years, I had moments of despair and moments when I thought, I've stuck myself with this ridiculous thing of drawing things all the time, and I'm locked into it, and I can't get it to go anywhere, I can't get out of it. I have to do something different. And there were various times during the 80s, particularly when I tried my hand at different things. Everything I tried, I ended up going back because only the drawings were mine. And there's something that, for me as an artist, matters a lot, which is it's my territory, and I possess it. And I'm always amazed that there aren't other people closer in there with me, but there aren't. And so I have this very strong sense that I've kind of cut out some kind of territory for myself, and that that gives me a kind of confidence, and because I'm drawing the things of our time is constantly changing. And I mean, one of the big breakthroughs you were asking about when I drew new objects, you know, about 5 years ago, it isn't all that long, 5 or 6 years ago, I suddenly realized I had to start to draw all the technological things, because for me, from my initial idea, they weren't, in a sense, ordinary because they were expensive. And then I realized that our idea of ordinary had changed. So we think we all have iPhones and they're very expensive, but we all have them. So our idea of ordinariness has changed. Ordinary before meant a bucket. You know, and now people have things they think of as very ordinary, it costs £1,000. And so that was, I realized that there are things in this room that in 10 years people are going to say, "What on earth was that?" You know, nobody will remember what they even are. But I also made me realize that I can go on just following what the world throws up in front of us. You know, I mean, in the now and then drawings downstairs, I have there's two sets of headphones, and one is the old one with the wire, and the other one is the wireless one, the latest wireless one. Well, since then, Apple has come out with those two little gadgets that which are tiny and no wire, you know. So I would have drawn those, but they came too late. You know, I've already drawn the iPhone 10 and it isn't even out yet.
That's very good. I mean, I suppose my last concluding point, if it is a point, I don't know if you would agree, is that even though you could talk about these objects in terms of topicality, that, you know, aviator, when were aviator Ray-Bans designed? I don't know, 1950 or 60?
Maybe the 40s.
Maybe the 40s. And yet it seems that your engagement with the idea of the modern is something that you managed to make articulate in the way you make art. That I would say that all of these objects, even if they cease to be topical, remain modern, that you've somehow captured their modernity. And I wonder if that is something too that is very important to you.
Well, that's one of the reasons. That's why I draw them like that's why I didn't want the hand. I wanted I thought that would give me a sense of a characteristic of modernity. I've never done things like, you know, I use the computer all the time, but I never use Photoshop. I use Illustrator, but I don't use Photoshop because I never distort anything. I never add to anything. I never do any of those. I never use any of the things that it can do to alter an image. That doesn't interest me. I want it to sit comfortably. What I do to sit comfortably in the modern world, and to feel like it's part of this time. I'm not worried about what happens in the how they're thought of in the future. To make something that connects with people in this moment seems to me to be the most important thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks very much. One question I had is I was very interested by what you were saying about the neutral space that these objects often occupy and the fact that there isn't context around them and it's just the ones behind you, for example, the objects are just there suspended against blackness, and particularly those ones I can see how the objects are self-contained and sealed, but I was looking at these ones here to my left and thinking that by contrast, by cropping these, there is a sense in which reality continues somewhere beyond them and that there is a space outside of the picture in a way that is not so much the case with the more iconic ones behind you. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about that and the decision to crop and how that comes about, particularly with these.
Well, I mean, in most of the drawings, I mean, like these ones, one of the things that I think is so fascinating about images is if you didn't know what all these things were, you wouldn't be able to understand my drawing. You need to look at it and see a train, you know what that is. So you already you are filling in all the information that I'm not giving you because you're already carrying it. And it's amazing how little information I give in relation to how much you are able to fill in. You know what it's for, you know what size it would be, you know what it looks like on the other side, you know how to tie the shoelaces, you know tons and tons of things about this thing that I'm not giving you any of that. Okay, so in a way, the fragment pieces are kind of extending that sense that you fill in the rest of the. I give you one earphone for that. You put in the rest. It's an extension of the idea that that you are constructing the thing that you know out of what I give you. I'm not giving you all that much. I'm giving you very, very little. But out of that, it's amazing how little you need to make a very complex construction.
Yes, I can ask you a little bit about some of the buildings, because when I compare the buildings to the other drawings, the buildings are not mass-produced, they're not universal objects, they're clearly a one-off, they're not ordinary at all. So I struggle to understand how they stand against the rest of the body of work, which is clearly very much in the opposite direction.
Yes, well, of course, you're absolutely right on all of those counts. I love all those buildings, and I think that those buildings, all of which are old now, some of them must be nearly 100 years old, still represent the modern world. Our world was made out of these things. The four pieces there. There's the four great architects of the 20th century, and so the only way that I can, that's what I'm trying to say, that I have created a language and I'm trying to extend the language beyond the boundaries of my own defined area of interest, of concern. This is my principal concern, but, I don't see why I shouldn't be able to make things about architecture just because they don't fit my purpose, I made up the scheme in the first place, so I made the rules so I can break them, and they are breaking those rules.
Can I ask a brief follow-up question? Is it about modernity or is it about being a classic? Because if it's about being a classic, the question is, could you imagine doing the same thing with the Renaissance iconic building?
No, I couldn't. I just wouldn't be able to do that. The only thing, but see, I've broken that rule too, because I have drawn 3 or 4 old master paintings. I've done Seurat's Bathers, I've done Las Meninas, I've done the Piero del Francesco Flagellation, and I think I've done something else, I can't remember. But I have drawn them exactly the same way I would draw a shoe. I just do black outlines. There's no black outlines on any of those paintings. In fact, most of them would have hated the idea. And I put them in my colors. That, you know, they're a form of homage, but also a way. One of the things about having a language is that I can pull things into my language, and they kind of become mine by going through the filter of my own language. And that it interests me about that, and these are the paintings. I could never do a painting I didn't absolutely love. I love those three paintings, and there's things about them that seem to me to relate to me and to what I do.
In the introduction, it was stated that your work doesn't necessarily conform to any particular genre, but one thing's for certain, you know Craig Martin when you see one, and you talked about the objects and then about the colour, and I was thinking that made me think about the extraordinary RA Summer Show hang that you did a few years ago, where suddenly you walked into the RA and the galleries were transformed into Craig Martins because of the colour. And it almost felt like the whole show was a Craig Martin in some ways, but it was also a fantastic foil for lots and lots of different artists' work. I wonder whether you found that an interesting juxtaposition. Did it succeed in doing what you intended to do? Because I just thought it was a fantastic hang.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I have to say, I was deeply reluctant to do it, to be what's called the coordinator of the summer exhibition. And I was kind of conned into doing it, to be honest. And then when I was asked to do it, I realized that there were going to be two big periods of time. I said, I don't have time to do it. I'm too busy. I don't have time to do it. And they said, well, so I said, well, I thought there must be two periods of time. One is the time you need a couple of weeks to select the work and a couple of weeks to hang the work. So I said, I'll only do one, so I won't have anything to do with the selection. I will only do the hanging. So I'm the only person who's ever coordinated who didn't do any of it. I didn't sit on any of the panels. I didn't look at any of the work that came past. And I thought, well, if I was there, maybe there'd be 10 works that would get in that wouldn't have, and 10 works that wouldn't have gotten in. So it wasn't enough, and it didn't matter to me. Because, you know, there are 13,000 entries and 500 get on the wall. I mean, it's hit and miss, you know. I mean, there's no great. It's not you know, it depends a lot on what somebody says. I like that one, I like that one. It's okay. So, but then, to be honest, when I started to think about hanging it and do the colored rooms, which I knew I would do, and then I totally enjoyed doing it. I absolutely loved playing with all that stuff. It was really exciting to have the things to, you know, it's like having a kind of a game where you could move things around and play with things. And there were certain things to do with the color, and the other thing was to do with certain kind of placement of key things. I was very interested in placing key things because the thing that I normally don't like about the Academy show is it's much too big, of course. And so it's very easy to feel, oh my God, I'm in another room. Am I in the same room? Have I left? This looks just like the last room. And so I was trying to give character to each room. So each room you would not feel like it was. So I even did things like, normally there are two rooms of prints, and the print rooms were always together, and I separated the two rooms of prints so that you found one here and you found another room of prints there. So that meant you went from a painting room to a print room to a painting room to a print room, which made it more interesting. There was a change of temperature between. So I did everything I could think of, my whole life experience of hanging shows and everything. I just put into that. I'm certainly never going to do another one, but I couldn't do another one because I've used everything, every trick in the book I've used on that one, and it worked. I have to admit I was a little bit nervous that it might not be to everybody's taste for me to hang so many of their pictures on, the other RAs on magenta walls. But the fact was it made everybody's work look better, which I knew would happen.
Okay.
Personal question, Michael. Your wife had a show in the early 1970s of object drawings given by James Mayer, which is a gallery, where she drew very beautifully individual objects and then had a carbon under drawing exhibited at the same time. Did that come from you, or did she take something from you? Because that was really pre your
It is pretty.
object. And I wonder if it did have any influence. I own one, and I still think it's extraordinarily beautiful.
I know.
Mug, it's just a mug, an orange mug.
No, they were really beautiful.
Yes.
They were very different in intent than mine.
Yes.
But at the time I was using objects. She was a very, very gifted painter in a way that I was not, and but her use of these modest things, I think that may have come from me, but not the doing of what she did, of course.
But at that time you were using buckets, milk bottles, shelves,
Pencils, erasers, glasses, mirrors, lots of, but genuine stuff. And her work was much more personal. I mean, her work was personal. There was something else that I was going to say earlier, which was, it seems important to say is, I've always thought that the best way to work was to be able to have a lot of the decisions, not to have to make a lot of the decisions. There's something that Jasper Johns said about the flag, and Johns is such an interesting person in relation to all these things, that when he decided to use the flag, he said it was so great because then I had the composition, I didn't have to think about that, I could think about something else. And that's what my work lets me do. I've got all these different things, but in a certain sense they're all the same, and I think about something else. And it's like, another example of this, there's something fantastic about being able to make something where you let go of something. It's like Damien's spot paintings. He doesn't make any, it's so little decision-making involved, other people can do them. If it's random, who cares who chooses the pot? It doesn't matter. Every single spot is a different color, and you got hundreds of different colors, and you just go boom, boom, try and deck, and that's it. And you don't use it again, and that's so. There's something very, very interesting to me about the kind of letting go of something, or letting something not have to be decided. Which is why I don't. I draw exactly the same way I did 30 years ago. I haven't changed anything about it. I think I've gotten better, and I draw different things, and I know much more about drawing, infinitely more than I did when I started, of course, but I draw the same way.
I just had a very elegant signal from somebody at the gallery to say that we should draw this to a close, which is a great shame, because I find whenever I talk with you, I always feel that as an artist, you approach modernity with the mind of a classical philosopher. And it's a very interesting combination, and it sort of gives rise to what used to be called, before it got lost, I think, somewhere along the way, the values of liberal humanism, which is loosely, why do we bother with all this stuff in the first place? And hearing you talk and hearing the questions from the audience and so forth makes you realize what a rich conversation it is, in addition to how beautiful and how thought-provoking these are. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you. Thank you.